Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more common sense. Today we're diving back into the works of Bertrand Russell. This is in praise of all idleness and other essays. We are on Scylla and Charybdis, or Communism and Fascism. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be this playlist, where I start off with Communism. We read the Communist Manifesto and discussed why it was such a horrible idea. Yesterday we did the same thing for Fascism, and today we get to deal with both. So with that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of In Praise of Idleness with Scylla and Charybdis, or Communism and Fascism. Now, I had to look up what this meant, right? Scylla and Charybdis is the impossible choice. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. It has to do with the Mediterranean Sea just off the coast of Sicily, and two hard to navigate spots. You are more than welcome to check that out in Wikipedia. It is an interesting read, but it is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing here. But the point being that it is an impossible choice. It is a difficult choice between communism and fascism. And I say that neither one of those are actual choices. So it is said by many in the present day that communism and fascism are the only practical alternatives in politics, and that whoever does not support the one, in effect, supports the other. Now, we're going to talk, like we hit it yesterday, we're going to talk about it again today, and I'm sure it will be part of tomorrow as well. There's not a whole lot of difference between communism, socialism, and fascism. All three of them want to take possession of the means of production, right? Fascism wants the government to be in complete control with central planning, with very little input from the people. Communism wants to take the means of control from the people and distribute it as they see fit to who they consider the people. And socialism is a half step between them. They want to seize the means of production for everyone and keep it in the government. And that is really literally the only difference between them. They are really like kissing cousins. They're all real close together and you don't want to be around them. So, I find myself in opposition to both. And socialism is much closer to communism, right? It is a half step to communism without the full commitment. And I could no more accept either alternative than if I had lived in the 16th century, I would have been either a Protestant or a Catholic. And again, this is some fallacious thought, right? Almost certainly, you would have been one or the other. Almost certainly. If you would have been in the 15th century, you almost certainly would have been Catholic, right? In the 16th or 17th, you almost certainly would have been one or the other, depending upon your locality. It is very uncommon for anyone to buck the system in which they were born, right? If you were born a Catholic, you're probably going to be a Catholic. That is not a rule, right? Not a hard, fast rule, but it is kind of a guideline. If you were born in the system, you're going to take for granted things that are intrinsic to that system, whether you believe in them or not. You, Mr. Russell, were born in religious freedom, and so you have the ability to think that you would have had religious freedom, but probably not. You most certainly probably would not have been a Martin Luther nailing your treatise to the door of the church. That almost certainly would not have been you. You wouldn't have even been Dante Alighieri, who was trying to explain something that was a little bit outside of the scope of the Catholic Church while maintaining yourself inside of the Catholic Church. You almost certainly would not have taken that, because one thing that we do know about Bertrand Russell, he was a coward. I will set forth, as briefly as I can, my objections. First to communism, then to fascism, and then to what both have in common. And I want to make perfectly clear that I started this particular playlist with 4 videos on the Communist Manifesto, right? We read the works of Marx aloud here and discussed them in great detail. When I speak of a communist, I mean a person who accepts the doctrines of the Third International. In a sense, the early Christians were communists. No, they were not. And so were many medieval sects. One of the things that I try to be very clear about is the difference between communism and communalism. Communism is the government coming in and taking the means of production and distributing it as they see fit. Communalism is you being in charge of your stuff and distributing it to your neighbors and your community, who you live communally with, freely through your own volition. That is an enormous difference, right? The early Christians were communalists. The Gnostics were communalists. Monastic society is communalism. Right? It is not the government doing it. It is independent actors coming together and freely, through their own volition, giving over their things for the betterment of the community. It is not the government coming in and saying, I'm going to take this thing and give this thing to someone who I think deserves it more. That is communism. Just to be clear, I believe in communalism. I think that you should have your stuff, but that you should, through ethics, try to distribute most of it, well, not even most of it, the parts that you see fit to benefit your neighbors. The example that I'm using, because it is fresh, right? New Year's Eve, my neighbor's house burned down. 3 houses caught on fire. One of them burned completely down. One also is a total loss, and the other one can be healed, right? It can be repaired. We, as a community, came together and donated to our neighbors things that would help them. Some people donated them a place to stay. Some people donated them food. Some people donated them clothing. Some people have donated them a vehicle. And you have the choice to do that in your community. That is communalism. That is it working. It is not the government coming in and saying, hey, you've got an extra shirt, give that to this person. That is communism. Back to the text. But in this sense is now obsolete. I will set forth my reasons for not being a communist Seratium. 1. I cannot assent to Marxist philosophy, still less to that of Lenin's materialism and imperio-criticism. We may do that video, y'all remind me in the comments. I am not a materialist, though I am even further removed from idealism. I do not believe that there is any dialectical necessity in historical change. This belief was taken over by Marx from Hegel without its only logical basis, namely, the primacy of the idea. Marx believed in the next stage in human development must be, in some sense, a progress. I see no reason for this belief. 2. I cannot accept Marx's theory of value, nor yet, in his form, the theory of surplus value. We talked about that extensively in the Communist Manifesto. The theory that the exchange value of a commodity is proportional to the labor involved in its production, which Marx took over from Ricardo, is shown to be false by Ricardo's theory of rent, and has long been abandoned by all non-Marxian economists. Most things propounded by Marx have been abandoned by all non-Marxian economists. The theory of surplus value rests upon Malthus's theory of population, which Marx elsewhere rejects. Marx's economics do not form a logically coherent whole, but are built up by the alternate acceptance and rejection of doctrines, as may suit his convenience, in making out a case against the capitalist. That is the hard part about doing this, right? Is this word is not complete. I have to try and piece it together. 3. It is dangerous to regard any one man as infallible. Let's hit that. The consequence is necessarily an oversimplification. The tradition of the verbal inspiration of the Bible has made men too ready to look for a sacred book, but this worship of authority is contrary to the scientific spirit. I would greatly disagree with that. Not that it shouldn't be, but it isn't, right? Worship of authority is leaning into the TE. If you don't know what I'm talking about, see the MBTI parts. But it is external thinking, right? The authority. So if Newton proposes his laws, the scientists give that authority. That is authority, right? The worship of authority. You cannot contradict Newton, or else scientific community is going to lose their shit on you. That is a worship. You don't have to believe in a deity to worship something. You can worship the television. People do it every fucking day. And so I don't believe that it is contrary to the scientific spirit. I do believe that we place too much weight upon other people's thoughts, right? Some things absolutely make sense, right? The laws of motion, yes. But some other things we can definitely do without. Communism is not democratic. That is for sure. What it calls the dictatorship of the proletariat is in fact the dictatorship of a small minority who become an oligarchic governing class. Yes, tyranny is the outflow of communism. All history shows that government is always conducted in the interest of the governing class, except insofar as it is influenced by fear of losing its power. That is why we have a republic with the ability to remove from our government people, right? You have the ability to vote for someone new. Most people, for some fucking reason, don't. But you should at least entertain the idea that if your senator is not doing what you want him to do, vote for someone else, right? That is the power in our structure in a republic, also not a democracy. We use democratic systems. We explained this extensively yesterday, but we use democratic systems, but we are not a democracy. We're not. The governing class in a communist state has even more power than the capitalist class in a democratic state. That is true. So long as it retains the loyalty of the armed forces, it can use its power to obtain for itself advantages quite as harmful as those of capitalists. To suppose that it will always act for the general good is mere foolish idealism, and is contrary to Marxian political psychology. I agree with that. 5. Communism restricts liberty, particularly intellectual liberty, more than any other system except fascism. That is also true. You don't find art in communism, right? You do, right? But you don't. You can have, the government will commission the creation of a statue, but you don't have a whole lot of leeway in how you present that statue, right? Look at those statues of Lenin. They believe in art, but they choose the person to do the art, and they give him the ability. But if you want to do art, that is outside of the scope of communism, right? Chances are you're not going to be the artist. You're not going to be the writer. You're not going to be the thinker, because you probably do not fall exactly in line with whatever the government is telling you to do. There is no innovation in communism. If you don't believe that, look the fuck around, right? You can look at the USSR as an example. There is a reason why it fell, and it was due to lack of innovation. If you look at China, the only advancements that they have come from stealing things. They don't have intellectual thinkers. They don't have people who think outside of the box, because that will get them shot in the head. The complete unification, and that's the part that really kills me about here, right? In our republic, we have people, well, if we all go communist, then we can write our books. No, you can't. No, you can't. You know who the first person to die in the communist revolution is every single time? The free thinkers. Anyone who has the idea, well, I'm going to write a book, they kill you. If you are the person who's like, I don't want to work in the fields, I want to make a painting, they kill you. That is literally how that works. And that's in practical application, not in theory, right? In theory, it works, but people don't live by theory. The practical application is that the government says, no, we need you to pick some fruit. And you're like, I'm not going to pick fruit. And they're like, done. That's how it works. All right, back to the text. The complete unification of both economic and political power produces a terrifying engine of oppression, in which there are no loopholes or exceptions. Under such a system, progress would soon become impossible, since it is the nature of bureaucrats to object to all change except increase in their own power. All serious innovation is only rendered possible by some accident, enabling unpopular persons to survive. That is what I literally just said. Kepler lived by astrology, Darwin by inherited wealth, Marx by Engels' exploitation of the proletariat of Manchester. Such opportunities of surviving in spite of unpopularity would be impossible under communism. Let's drink to that. There is, in Marx, and in current communist thought, an undue glorification of manual as against brain workers. The result has been to antagonize many brain workers who might otherwise have seen the necessity of socialism, and without those whose help the organization of a socialist state is scarcely possible. The division of classes is put by Marxians in practice even more than in theory, too low in the social scale. 7. The preaching of the class war is likely to cause it to break out at a moment when the opposing forces are more or less evenly balanced, and even when the preponderance is on the side of the capitalist. Now, I'm going to piss off everybody that I need to with this particular statement, but class war is victim mentality. You're blaming someone else for your coming short. That is victim mentality, and if you subscribe to that, you will not be happy on my channel in any way, shape, or form. I am all about taking personal responsibility. It is up to you to rise. I hear all of the time, eat the rich, and that is fucking dumb, because one day you might be rich and you might get eaten. Where is the defining line for rich? Where is the defining line for this is too much money? If you make up to this line, it's fine. But if you make $1 more, we have to kill you because you are the proletariat. It's victim mentality. It is blaming somebody else for something that you are not doing. Piss off. If the capitalist forces preponderate, the result is an era of reaction. If the forces on both sides are roughly equal, the result, given modern methods of warfare, is likely to be the destruction of civilization, involving the disappearance of both capitalism and communism. Wrong. Capitalism is not going to go away. There will never be a time where somebody is not trying to sell something for a profit. Even in communist states, they have to use capitalism. It's one of the key fundamental flaws in this theory, right? If the government was actually doing what it needed to do, you would not need money. But there was a ruble, there is a yen, right? These things do exist, and they do exist because we need an exchange of value. As long as there is a need for an exchange of value, capitalism will live. Because that is what capitalism is. It is me deciding what the price for my good is, and you either accepting that or not. That is capitalism. Is there exploitation of things? Abso-fucking-lutely. That has to do with ethics. That is our moral core. That is where we are wrong, right? You, as a business owner, should be looking out for those who you employ so that they have the best life you can possibly help them to attain. You should be training them to be leaders in every step of every part of the operation. That is ethical. Right? Ethical capitalism is not communism. It is not socialism. It's barely even communalism. And I subscribe that communalism is the best way, right? That is capitalism isolated to small areas where everybody in that area is looking out for their own best interest and that of their neighbors, right? I should not be making $1 million a year and employing anyone on minimum wage. Period. The end. It is unethical. Where that dividing line is drawn, right? $1 million is easy to talk about because it is a large number. But what if that number is 150,000, right? That is more than you need to live comfortably in most places in the United States. Should you be taking more than that if somebody is making minimum wage? That's an ethical question that we need to consider. But $1 million is fairly easy. If you are making $1 million a year for yourself personally, not your business, because, revenue and all of that is different from what you actually take home. But if your take home is $1 million a year and you employ even one person for longer than a year or so on minimum wage, you are a horrible fucking person. I mean, that is what we know, right? You look at these people. Now, Amazon, as terrible as people think of Bezos, Amazon pays above minimum wage. They pay a fairly good living wage. They are more ethical than some place like Walmart, where almost everybody is on minimum wage or just slightly above it, right? As long as there is a need for a law to say you have to pay a human being at least this much in order to put them to work, it's never going to be enough, right? You, as a business owner, should be ensuring that your people are the best people. And because they are the best people, you should be taking care of those people to the best of your ability. And that does not include you keeping them wage poor while you have 3 beach houses, right? That is an ethics problem. I don't think the government should be involved in that. I think that if the CEO is living in that manner, nobody should fucking do business with them, and that will put a stop to that shit. Back to the text. I think that where democracy exists, socialists should rely upon persuasion and should only use force to repel an illegal use of force by their opponents. But this method will be possible for it will be possible for socialists to acquire so great a preponderance that the final war may be brief and not sufficiently serious to destroy civilization. You are wrong. Tomorrow we will be diving into socialism, right? The case for socialism is tomorrow's video. We will get into that in extreme detail. Number 8. There is so much hate in Marx and in communism that communists can hardly be expected, when victorious, to establish a regime affording no outlet for malevolence. The arguments in favor of oppression are therefore likely to seem to the victors stronger than they are, especially if the victory has resulted from a fierce and doubtful war. After such a war, the victorious party are not likely to be in the mood for the sane reconstruction. Marxists are too apt to forget that war has its own psychology, which is the result of fear and is independent of the original cause of contention. The view that the only practical possible choice is between communism and fascism seems to me definitely untrue in America, England, and France, and probably also in Italy and Germany. England had a period of fascism under Cromwell, France under Napoleon, but in neither case was this a bar to subsequent democracy. Politically immature nations are not the best guides as to the political future. And once again, I want to point out that here in America, we do not have a democracy. You can make the argument for some of these other ones, right? Mob rule does indeed take place in some of these places, especially then, but here it is the rule of law that we live by. My objections to fascism are simpler than my objections to communism, and in a sense more fundamental. The whole purpose of the communist is one with which on the whole I am in agreement. My disagreement is as to rather means rather than ends, but in the case of the true fascist, I dislike the end as much as the means. Fascism is a complex movement. Its German and Italian forms differ widely, and in other countries, if it spreads, it may assume still other shapes. It has, however, certain essentials, without which it would cease to be fascism. It is anti-democratic, it is nationalistic, it is capitalistic, and it appears to those sections of the middle class which suffer through modern developments and expect to suffer still more if socialism or communism become established. I want to point out something here, right? If fascism is an ultranationalism, then what the Germans were was not fascists. And fascism is the government taking control of the means of production, right? With no democratic means. Okay, fine. Hitler was elected, right? That's democratic means. Okay, well, he became a dictator. Fine. But, right, the government expanded beyond the nationality. And not just a little bit, but like largely, right? Poland and all of the Slav nations and all of that. But then it went east into France and it went north into England. Like, they were trying much more than national. Nationalism implies that within these borders on this land, we are better than you. It is not the taking of other lands. It is the isolation of themselves. Now, I understand that that understanding of fascism is different than other people's, and I'm fine with being different. It is anti-democratic, it is nationalistic, it is capitalistic, and it appeals to those sections of the middle class which suffer through modern developments and expect to suffer still more if socialism or communism becomes established. Communism also is anti-democratic, but only for a time, at least so far as its theoretical statements can be accepted as giving its real policy. Moreover, it aims at serving the interests of wage earners, who are a majority in advanced countries, and are intended by communists to become the whole population. Fascism is anti-democratic in a more fundamental sense. It does not accept the greatest happiness of the greatest number as the right principle in statesmanship. Neither does communism, but selects certain individuals, nations, and classes as the best. So does communism. If you don't believe that, look and see what the bourgeoisie actually was. Go see what happened when they took the land from the farmers because they thought that the farmers were the people that they needed to revolt against. And as alone worthy of consideration. The remainder are to be compelled by force to serve the interest of the elect. While fascism is engaged in the struggle to acquire power, it has to make an appeal to a considerable section of the population. Both in Germany and in Italy, it arose out of socialism by rejecting whatever was anti-nationalistic in the Orthodox program. Like I just said, fascism would be national-oriented, not world domination. That would be socialism. It took over from socialism the idea of economic planning and an increase in the power of the state, but the planning, instead of being for the benefit of the whole world, was to be in the interests of the upper and middle class in one country. And these interests it seeks to secure not so much by increased efficiency as by increased oppression, both of the wage earner and of unpopular sections of the middle class itself. In relation to the classes which lie outside of the scope of its benevolence, it may, at best, achieve the kind of success to be found in a well-run prison, more than it does not even wish to do so. And again, I refer you to communism. The root objection to fascism is its selection of a portion of mankind as alone important. The holders of power have no doubt made such a selection in practice ever since government was first instituted. But Christianity, in theory, has always recognized each human soul as an end in itself and not a mere means to the glory of others. Modern democracy has derived strength from the moral ideas of Christianity and has done much to divert government from exclusive preoccupation with the interest of the rich and the powerful. Fascism is, in this respect, a return to what was the worst in ancient paganism. If fascism could succeed, it would not do anything to cure the evils of capitalism. On the contrary, it would make them worse. The manual work would come to be performed by forced labor at subsistence level. Again, see communism. In practical application, the USSR, North Korea, China, all prime examples of that. The manual work coming to be and performed by forced labor. They are literally still slavery in communist China. The men engaged in it would have no political rights. Again, see China. No freedom as to where they lived or worked, and probably not even a permanent family life. They would, in fact, be slaves. See the Uyghur Muslims in China. All of this may already be seen beginning in the German method of dealing with unemployment. It is, indeed, an inevitable result of capitalism freed from the control of democracy, and the similar conditions of forced labor in Russia suggest that it is an inevitable result of any dictatorship. In the past, absolutism has always been accompanied by some form of slavery or serfdom. All this would result if fascism were to succeed. But it is hardly possible that it should permanently succeed because it cannot solve the problem of economic nationalism. The most powerful force on the side of the Nazis has been heavy industry, especially steel and chemicals. Heavy industry, organized nationally, is the greatest influence making for war in the present day. If every civilized country had a government subservient to the interest of a heavy industry, as is, to a considerable extent, already the case, war, before long, would be unavoidable. Each fresh victory of fascism brings war nearer, and war, when it comes, is likely to sweep away fascism along with most of what has been there in existence at its outbreak. Fascism is not an ordered set of beliefs like laissez-faire or socialism or communism. It is essentially an emotional protest. Partly of those members of the middle class, such as small shopkeepers, who suffer from modern economic developments, part of an anarchic, industrial magnates whose love of power has grown into megalomania. It is irrational in the sense that it cannot achieve what its supporters desire. There is no philosophy of fascism, but only a psychoanalysis. If it could succeed, the result would be widespread misery. See again, communism and socialism. But its inability to find a solution for the problem of a war makes it impossible that it should succeed for more than a brief moment. I do not think that England and America are likely to adopt fascism because the tradition of representative government is too strong in both countries to permit such a development. The ordinary citizen has a feeling that public affairs concern him and would not wish to lose the right of expressing his political opinions. General elections and presidential elections are sporting events, like the Derby, and life would seem duller without them. Of France, it is impossible to feel quite so confident, but I shall be surprised if France adopts fascism, except, perhaps, temporarily during a war. There are some objections, and these, to my mind, are the most conclusive, which apply to communism and fascism equally. Both are attempts by a minority to mold a population forcibly in accordance with a preconceived pattern. They regard a population as a man regards the materials out of which he intends to construct a machine. The materials undergo much alteration, but in accordance with his purposes, not with any law of development inherent in them. Where living beings are concerned, and most of all in the case of human beings, spontaneous growth tends to produce certain results, and others can only be produced by means of a certain stress and strain. Embryologists may produce beasts with 2 heads or with a nose where a toe should be, but such monstrosities do not find life very pleasant. Similarly, fascists and communists, having in their minds a picture of society as a whole, distort individuals so as to make them fit into a pattern. Those who cannot be adequately distorted are killed or placed in concentration camps. See again, China and the USSR and North Korea and anywhere else that either communism, fascism, or socialism have been put in place. Nazi Germany being another prime example. I do not think an outlook of this sort, which totally ignores the spontaneous impulses of the individual, is ethically justifiable, or can, in the long run, be politically successful. It is possible to cut shrubs into the shape of peacocks, and by a similar violence, a similar distortion can be inflicted upon human beings. But the shrub remains passive, while the man, whatever the dictator may desire, remains active, if not in one sphere, then in another. The shrub cannot pass on the lesson in the use of the shears which the gardener has been teaching, but the distorted human being can always find humbler human beings upon whom he can wield smaller shears. The inevitable effects of artificial molding upon the individual are to produce either cruelty or listlessness, but perhaps both in alternation. And from a population with these characteristics, no good thing is to be expected. The moral effect upon the dictator is another matter to which both communists and fascists give insufficient consideration. If he is, to begin with, a man with little human sympathy, he will, from the first, be unduly ruthless, and will shrink from no cruelty in pursuit of his impersonal ends. See the story of Stalin and the chicken. If, initially, he suffers sympathetically from the misery which theory obliges him to inflict, he will either have to give way to a successor made of sterner stuff, or will have to stifle his humanitarian feelings, in which case he is likely to become even more sadistic than the man who has undergone no such struggle. In either case, government will be in the hands of ruthless men, in whom love of power will be camouflaged as desire for a certain type of society. By the inevitable logic of despotism, whatever the good may have existed in the original purposes of the dictatorship will gradually fade out of sight, and the preservation of the director's power will emerge more and more as the naked purpose of the state machine. Preoccupation with machines has produced what may be called the manipulator's fallacy, which consists in treating individuals and societies as if they were inanimate, and manipulators as if they were divine beings. Human beings change under treatment, and the operators themselves change as a result of the effects which the operations have upon them. Social dynamics is therefore a very difficult science, about which less is known than is necessary to warrant a dictatorship. In the typical manipulator, all feeling for natural growth in his patient is atrophied. The result is not, as he hopes, passive adaptation to a place in the preconceived pattern, but morbid and distorted growth, leading to a pattern which is grotesque and macabre. The ultimate psychological argument for democracy and for patience is that an element of free growth, of go as you please and untrained natural living, is essential if men are not to become misshapen monsters. In any case, believing, as I do, that communist and fascist dictatorships are alike undesirable, I deplore the tendency to view them as the only alternatives, and to treat democracy as obsolete. If men think them the only alternatives, they will become so. If men think otherwise, they will not. And that brings us to the end of this particular lesson. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat not difficult topic, right? I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. You can look at simply the definitions of these three terms, right? Communism, socialism, and fascism, and see that they are all really fucking close. Like, really, really close. There is differentiation, but it is so slight as to be almost unobservable. It is the state in control of things. We should endeavor to be the opposite of that as much as possible. I get annoyed, like really, really annoyed with the government isn't doing enough for X, right? Disaster relief being a prime example right now in our culture. We have a couple of states dealing with hurricane damage. We have a state dealing with severe fire damage. And everybody's complaining that the state isn't doing enough, and I don't think the state should be. We should be communally doing what we need to, and that is the response that you see happen until the state interferes. If you look at Asheville, North Carolina, in that region where we had Helena come through, severe devastation, and the first response of everyone around them was to assist, and did so. They sent food, they sent clothing, they sent shelter. They went to take care of their people, and they don't live there, but they're in the next state over. They sent things. They're 4 states over. They're sending things. That is their people, and so they send help. And then the government comes in and says, no, you can't use this kind of help. Nope, no, I know you've got to sleep outside. You don't have the money for a hotel. They're all booked up anyway. You have to sleep outside, but it's not okay that if somebody built you a shed that you can live in. Like, the government interfering is a major setback. Should they play a part in rebuilding? Yes, somewhat, a small one, right? We pay taxes for a reason. Roads are real things. There's a whole lot of contention right now. The people came together and they provided access roads, and then the government comes in and says, that's not going to work. There's reasons for that. You almost certainly did not build a standard road. You built a substandard road, and it served a purpose. I am not taking that away. That was a great thing. But if you're going to be passing heavy loads over it, it has to meet a certain standard. That has to happen. That's the function of government. Protection and freedom, right? Protect you so that the roads don't fall apart and the 18-wheeler fall off in the ravine. But it shouldn't be so oppressive that you are relying upon them to provide you with shelter. If you're relying on the government to provide you with shelter, you're in dire straits. Because the government is not set up that way. It's not meant to be the immediate response. FEMA plays a part, but I think, again, that FEMA plays too big of a part. There should be some emergency response, absolutely. Get water in there, get food in there, get shelter in there for these people, absolutely. But the long-term effects of paying people to stay in a hotel, that's kind of detrimental. That is the state taking control, even in our republic, right? It is amplified in each one of these systems. The government taking control makes it inefficient every single time. Not just inefficient, but like antithetical to efficiency. The government central planning doesn't work. It has been shown time and time again. USSR, North Korea, Germany, right? All of these places show you that these systems, they don't work. They're great in theory. But communalism is better. Communalism works in a republic. It is not a system of government. It is you taking care of your neighbors. That's where I believe we should focus, right? The republic gives us laws. Our democratic systems give us a say in those laws. That's great. But the government shouldn't be the first responders. They shouldn't. It should be local people. We will be diving deeply into socialism in the next video because that is the next one up. That is the one that brought about this, right? I was requested to check out the case for socialism, and I found out that it was part of these essays, and I was like, we're going to do the whole thing. We're going to talk about every single part of this because that is how knowledge comes about, by understanding the context of the situation, right? His beliefs on socialism are going to be defined by his beliefs in fascism, communism, and democracy. We're going to put to rest some of those arguments like we did with the Communist Manifesto. We're going to do that with this. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated here. As long as it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have another work that you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments down below. I will get to it. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks because I am not a communist. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Tape. Peace.